meeting. And so we'll start with a little bit of updates. There's not a whole lot, but the gist of this meeting is to look at and talk about like the final core deliverables for this first phase. So phase one, or budget period one of the project is ending this month, and the main deliverables, core deliverables that are due are kind of the scope of both the resilience code, the net zero roadmap, and then a framework for the living implementation guide. And you've all seen bits and pieces of this as they've been in development. So this is your opportunity to provide final input on those scopes before they get submitted to DOE next month. We just want to make sure, since these are going to be tools for the jurisdictions, that you all had an opportunity to see them before they go, provide any input, see if there's any tweaks that are needed. But a lot of time and effort have gone into the development of these, a lot of technical meetings over the past year or so. So I'm really excited to be able to present them. Kevin, really the only update I had was a reminder to everyone, September's the end of the quarter. And so jurisdiction folks, you'll see an email from me if you have an in-kind match requesting that you submit your time by mid-October, so we can get that submitted as part of the full package that's going to DOE by the end of October for reporting for this quarter. Kevin, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think in terms of reporting, that's probably the main thing.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, all right, well, let's not take up any more time. Kevin, you're up first, and I'm assuming you want to share your screen. So I just put in a placeholder. Let's walk through the scope for the resilience code and the roadmap.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. Let me get Alt Control Delete and restart this. 1 second.
Today has been a day for technical difficulties. You're not alone.
I'm sorry.
Today, it's all kinds of trouble.
Do
you want me to pull up one of the documents for you?
No, I'm just restarting and then restarting Adobe. I'm just pulling up the PDF that went out for the code concept summaries. Sorry, this is so weird. Teams is like not giving it as an option to share that specific window, and I have so many tabs open. So
I can pull something up if that would be helpful.
yeah, I'll just go to the Word doc version.
Awesome.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. So I think, Leslie, you sent this out in the email, right? So we were hoping, this is the version that went out in the email, so we were hoping we would have a chance to have an open conversation about maybe some of the descriptions in here, or just answer any questions you all had about where we've ended up. This is sort of the framework document that we're using at the end of budget period one, as Leslie mentioned. So we're trying to capture in the description box here, we're trying to capture some of the, I think, some of the ideas behind the code measure and capture the intent and applicability of each measure before we then turn in the next budget period to actually writing out measures that address the code concept. So this says measure title. Actually, this is really the code concept title. Many of these will have multiple code measures. And as you remember, this is going to be an appendix to the IBC and the IRC. So we've tried to mark in the description when it is applicable to commercial buildings and when residential. So I think this was developed through the tag, and I think it's fair to say that it's a product of, 25 to 40 people's brain power. And I think since you had it in the email, hopefully you had a chance to review it. And I just wanted to go through and point out I think we have 24 code measures. So I just wanted to just state what those are, and I'll go through the document here and then just make time to answer any questions. So hopefully you have the descriptions. You've already looked through them, and we can answer any questions and maybe take any comments. I think we already received one set of comments on the roadmap, which we'll also look at. That's all we've received so far. So we'd love to hear comments back from all you on the steering committee, because the comments we've received so far are from the core team and the tag. Okay, so we ended up creating a list of, I forget how many total measure and code concepts we had from the tag. I think around 130. Those were then put into a list, and through a series of focus groups with the tag, we prioritize them in terms of a first round of code language writing, second round, and third round. So kind of did, instead of a high, medium, low way of ranking things, we tried to just do it in batches. So like these are the ones we'll address first, and then second, what's third. And it's not necessarily because these are the most important. Sometimes it's because a few of them are maybe the easiest or the ones that had the most consensus on how we should address them, so we can get them done quickly. And yeah, so I'll go ahead and run through these. These are organized not by risk, but by applicability, I guess, or like the part of the building or site that they're being addressed. So the organization should make sense as I go through them. So in the site requirements bucket, the code concepts that we have had prioritized from the tag are cool hardscapes and shading, open spaces, climate adapted landscaping, permeable hardscapes, and multimodal transportation. And that, of course, gets into zoning and transportation plans. But it will, the focus here is on building codes where there is some overlap. The next category was building materials and techniques. And the first deceptively short description here, this is actually probably our most complicated code concept or measure, was local materials and characteristics. We also had cool roofs and walls as a part of this category. And I believe those are the only two that were a part of that for the first round. Thermal health, thermal comfort, temperature control. Yeah, we've landed on the label of thermal health for this category. There's a lot of different ways to say it. The code concepts under this category included high performance glazing assemblies, exterior fixed and operable shading, interior shading requirements, operable windows, ventilation bypass and economizers, and the maximum indoor set point. Something we saw from Tucson and a few other jurisdictions actually make it through while this project was underway, and the 2024 edits were happening. So in amendments, so we were happy to see another precedent for us to rely on there, and one from the collaborative itself. And then we also had enhanced air sealing as a category, or code concept. And the next category is water conservation, obviously a big category. This might need to be broken down into a few different things, but we have under this category code concepts including water efficient appliances and fixtures, water distribution and circulation systems. I think I saw Anthony Floyd on the call today. He's been helping us with that. Potable rainwater harvesting systems. And some members of the tag have been helping us work through that issue as well. non-potable rainwater capture and retention systems, right? Slightly different from potable rainwater harvesting requirements. There's also gray water, climate adapted irrigation, slightly different than landscaping requirements, and the water smart pools requirement. And I think this one was recommended from TAG members who were looking over at Nevada in Henderson County, which has some good provisions that we can reference as precedent. All right, and I think this is the last of the categories in this. Sorry to scroll down, just want to make sure that's correct. So yeah, this draft or framework here, this is the first category, or the last category, sorry, wildfire risk mitigation. And the code concepts here really following the WUI code, the Wildland Urban Interface Code. Defensible space, ignition resistant construction. So that's focusing on the building itself. Defensible space is focusing on hardening the site. And then HVAC filtration systems. And this was one of the last things we talked about in our last meeting of the TAG. And there were a few questions to sort out, but we do have the IGCC as a precedent here, which has some advanced requirements for HVAC filtration systems for both recirculation and fresh air intake systems. And I think California also had some precedent models there. So I'll scroll quickly to the top. Hopefully I'm not making you sick. And yeah, we'll just open it up for discussion.
Real quick, Kevin, just to reiterate, just to make sure I'm clear. So these measured titles, quote unquote, those are really concepts. And when this gets developed out, there will be multiple actual code provisions under each of those.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are the major code concepts, and many of them will have multiple provisions. And we did this because it allowed us to avoid having to separate things out into commercial and residential right now. So we can really just focus on the concepts and the priorities.
If you've got questions or comments from Matt and then Anthony.
Yeah, just a couple quick things that I wanted to mention, especially up here in the beginning for the site requirements. I think if not 100%, then at least 99% is covered through local zoning ordinances. But for places that don't have those, this could assist, excuse me, in that regard. But like I said, a lot of this is already covered under our local zoning ordinances or city codes, or other design manuals. So the site requirements, when talking about building codes, if that was the intent, will be a little bit more difficult to tie to a building code, because it is just that, a building code. Some of the other items that were on the list are also part of local amendments, like you said. And we had other, Phoenix didn't have, I can't remember which one you said, Tucson did just recently, but there were other, like the water conservation amendments that City of Phoenix has already in place as well. So as you said, some precedent set. And then some of the viability will be difficult for like the rainwater harvesting because of conflicting codes. Because whenever you have a code, the most conservative is the one that takes precedent. So for rainwater harvesting, it's a bit difficult because I think a lot of people want to try to use that as their local retention requirement, because that's what retention does, is it captures rainwater, but then it dissipates it, usually through a dry well, sometimes through stormwater pipe systems. But rainwater harvesting is meant to keep the water. Stormwater control is meant to convey water. So it's gonna, in all cases that attempted to do it, when I was the supervisor for the civil plan review section, it was required to have essentially a double system. So you could do rainwater harvesting, but you can't count that as your stormwater retention because you have to be able to separate the amount of retention that you're required to hold and release because of certain mitigation factors like mosquito control, things like that.
Mhm.
I don't know how you make the potable rainwater harvesting. I think is going to be one of the most difficult and cost ineffective requirements. Not that it can't be done, but that it will typically be very expensive to do to make
Okay.
rainwater potable. But certainly if there's technical guidelines on how to do it, there are codes that exist today that are not adopted, but are, if you want to do it this way, then this is how you do it. So this would, I think, be something similar to that for specifically for the potable rainwater.
Mhm.
That was all that I had.
Great. Yeah, great feedback. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that was the intent with the potable rainwater harvesting section. We had heard um, from members of the TAG and other stakeholders that it was often a barrier not having any specifications or minimum standards. So not requiring that these systems be installed, but if it's there, then this is what you have to do is kind of what we're trying to open the door to by including that in the code. So I think that one specifically, we're not imagining being a mandatory requirement in any of the appendices, commercial or residential. And yeah, there's great feedback there. For instance, site requirements, we know open spaces, typically that is in the um, city ordinance around land use or planning, zoning. There does seem to be some flexibility with incorporating it into the building code. You're addressing measures that can be inspected and enforced before the certificate of occupancy on the site level. So we were focusing on that for the code. And just in terms of this project, there is also a roadmap, which I think we'll look over that as well in a second. But I think some of this is us at MBI just taking the feedback from TAG members and identifying priorities to address in terms of resilience in the region. And some of this will probably get pulled out of the building code. Open spaces is one example. We'll probably take it out of the code and it will probably become a roadmap item. That the roadmap is another document we're creating, which has policy recommendations, city ordinances, like maybe model language around city ordinances could be included in there. But I think there is another requirement around interior shading, and we're realizing that that one probably has some difficulties with enforcement if it's running through building departments, and it maybe is better located in a property code or something addressing rental units and just ensuring that tenants have mini blinds or something as simple as that. So yeah, great feedback. And yeah, we should continue this conversation maybe in budget period 2. It's good to hear from Phoenix.
And Anthony, you put your hand down, but you had it up for a while. Did you have some comments?
Yeah, it seems that most of my questions were answered. So the only thing I'll say at this point is coordination between planning and the building department. And it is possible in certain cases, particularly what we had done in Scottsdale, that planning knew about the requirements of the IGCC related to site, and we included it in their planning documents when there were submittals for new projects going through the planning department or our development review board. So we wanted to make sure that early on the project owners, the applicant, knew what was coming. It wasn't necessarily enforced by planning, but planning deferred to the building department for some of those site requirements.
Hmm. Interesting. I may have to pick your brain about that more, Anthony, at some point, just what that workflow looked like and how we could maybe take that into consideration, even if it works a little differently in each jurisdiction in a home rule state.
Yeah, sure.
Sort of how to feed some of that information to the planning department so that it's coordinated with the building department as well. Okay, great feedback so far.
Nina noted in the chat that Coconino County has code for potable rainwater systems.
Yes, I think Steve White was he's a member of the TAG, and I think he was one of the authors of that for Coconino County, and he's been helping us with it.
Yes, you're right.
And he did note the cost of some of the systems when you have to have a lot of stainless steel. So they were trying to figure out how to address that barrier, but also that, yeah, the intent was not to create it as a mandatory requirement, but just to allow enforcement and permitting, really.
So, Kevin, I mean, I'm sure folks, if they haven't had a chance to review, you have a little more time to take comments. Do you want to set a deadline for additional feedback and comments on this before it needs to go to DOE?
Yeah, I think we would need it by the 15th of October. That's when the reporting is due as well. So maybe we can just say the 15th. That'll give me a week to review it, and then our internal deadline is the 22nd. So I think we'll, yeah, if you have a chance to review the code concept summaries, the descriptions, we tried to keep them brief. I think we also sent out, I know we sent out the roadmap. Did we send out to the steering committee, Leslie, the notes from the TAG meetings? Like there was a spreadsheet that summarized some of our notes and actually had 2 columns with just the notes that MBI took.
Yes, the spreadsheet did go out. There were 3 different documents you sent, 2
Okay.
Word documents and the spreadsheet.
Great. Yeah, if you want to look at that spreadsheet too, if you have any questions about how we came up with detail in the description for some of these code concepts, or you're wondering if anyone in the TAG raised any objections or identified any challenges or barriers, and that was really the focus of our last 2 TAG meetings that happened in July and June, all the way back in June and August. Yeah, those last 2 TAG meetings, we went through these code concepts and really just tried to identify barriers and challenges to implementation and sort out what would need to be done for residential versus commercial. So hopefully with those 2 documents, you can look through and see if there's anything you think is missing or, yeah, any recommendations you have to refine it.
So this document, which just to kind of sort out what all went to this group, this one is titled the Code Concept Summaries, and it's just kind of a succinct way of seeing kind of the overall groupings of summaries and kind of where that came from. And then the potential barriers to code concepts is the spreadsheet. Correct. And that one also includes like there are code concepts that have multiple benefits, and that also looks at where maybe a code concept intersects with, it helps with extreme heat. It helps with flooding. So there's that in there, correct?
Mhm.
And then you want to describe the third document real quick. That is the one that is titled Tag and Focus Group Code Concepts, Initial Summaries and Prioritizations. So that
I'm glad we shared that with the steering committee. Okay, I thought that just went out to the core team. Yeah, so that's where, as I was explaining earlier, that's where you see the priorities or the kind of ranking of these. So actually I can jump over to that real quick. Oh, now I have to find it on my windows.
I just had it up. Back up.
Here it is. I think this is the right.
Yep.
So you can see this is organized slightly differently. We're organizing this one by resilience category or risk. And so these were the, I think, yeah, we had condensed the initial 130 code concepts down to these measures. Again, there are titled measures here, but these really are code concepts. And then we went through a series of focus groups with the TAG members. I think we had 5 of those, maybe 5 to 7. I think we repeated a few with the EAP as well. And we really, I think in the last few of those, we focused on trying to identify the highest priority items or the ones that should be addressed first. So as I was saying, labeled priority, but really this is just indicating, you know, the first batch, second batch, third batch. And I know that we also included some early versions of the descriptions here. So you can see this for each of the code measures. Extreme heat had a lot of attention for the first round. It's a priority, of course, for the region. And scrolling through, you can see that for each of them, we've had just based on feedback from TAG members, I think, identified these 3 rounds of priorities. So that's the second document that went out to the group. And then there was also this, I think, and this has notes. This is the spreadsheet I was explaining earlier. This is color-coded rainbow system over here showing you each resilience category and the ones we think that each measure or code concept has the most impact on. And then sort of the second version of the description, the Word doc that I just went through, the first version, and then the Word doc that we went through the longest at the beginning of me talking here. That was the final version of the description, the third round of edits, the descriptions. And then you can see in this column, these are some of the notes that we kept. So this should just list, looks like this is an early version, but there should be 25 of these measures or code concepts on that spreadsheet. And it should give you some insight into how the TAG developed some of the descriptions.
I think it's safe to say, you know, the devil's in the details, so there'll be a lot more opportunity for input as NBI and the technical team start turning this into actual code language. But definitely we wanted to make sure you all had a chance to kind of look over, see what the end result of all the technical discussions were and be able to weigh in again before it went to DOE. And just to reiterate, if you can get comments to Kevin by the 15th, you can send them to me and I can pass them along or send them directly to him this morning. Yes, Matt.
Yeah, just a, I guess kind of follow up to what I was saying before, question rather. Will you guys be taking a more fine-tooth comb through these proposals and the existing codes to make sure that what you're proposing isn't already in the code sections?
Yes, definitely. So I think we are scheduled to have a public comments draft out next spring.
Okay.
And that will actually include some code language and specific measures. And we have a whole set of precedents. I think one of the first exercises the TAG did back in December of 2024, January of this year. They went through, we had a Padlet board or like a Jamboard, and they helped us identify existing code language. So, and we've also been just collecting that at NBI as well. So we have a list of precedent code language, and we've tried to identify sections of the IECC, both commercial and residential, that already address some of these measures where we will need to just sort of tinker with some of the specifications. Like cool roofs is an easy example, right? Do we want to mess with the SRI values? Do we want to add a climate zone or recommend that we include climate zone 4, because I think currently in the 2024 IACC commercial pool roofs are only climate zone 0 through 3. So we're looking at that, and I think a lot of these also that are they're focused on addressing resilience in terms of the specific hazards we've identified, looking at the FEMA National Risk Index as our kind of starting point for the hazard risk assessment portion of building a resilience code and identifying what needs to be addressed in the region. So I think there's a lot of measures that maybe address a larger idea of resilience, and we're trying to do justice to that idea as well, that motive. I think a lot of members of the collaborative really want to see some of those elements be brought into the resilience code. So we're not just addressing extreme heat by adding insulation and things, but also thinking about climate adaptation, mitigation, maybe even sustainability. So a lot of measures, that's all to say, a lot of measures from the IGCC as well that we're looking at. And a few participating jurisdictions also have some above code amendments, local amendments that we're looking at. And so there's a lot to sort of, coordinate, but we are trying to make sure that we're not just repeating anything. We want to, or creating a code measure that is, contradicts some of the base code without actually specifying what's changing, because we know that would not be very useful, especially as we move into 2027 and 2030 code cycles.
So I think the 2030 code cycle hearings and board discussions are, excuse me, are next month. So I assume that these proposals won't be ready by then. So it'll have to be the code cycle after the 2030.
For ICC?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, the 2027 is not over yet. There's another round of hearings for
October,
the IUCC.
yeah. Late October is the 2027 hearings.
Yes.
Anthony? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, then yeah, you'll have time for the 2030.
Yeah, I think they're in Cleveland.
Yeah, that's
Ohio, if
correct.
anyone's attending. I'll be
Yeah,
there
I'll
for
be
a few
there
days.
too. Same.
So before we transition over to the roadmap, and Kevin, maybe you can take about 10 minutes so we leave time for Julia to go over the living implementation guide framework. We've done a couple of community engagement sessions last week and earlier this week that really gave a nice overview of how the FEMA risk index is being integrated into this, as well as the vision for how kind of the people-centric, which is, I think, how we're referring to the equity piece now, how that evaluation, they're thinking that might happen when those recordings are ready. We'll make sure that you get them too, because I think you would all find them really informative in terms of seeing some of that, how some of the technical and the equity underpinning of where NBI is trying to go with all this. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Again, feel free to send additional comments to Kevin through October 15th, but you want to move over to the roadmap?
Sure. Hopefully my Adobe PDF doesn't crash this time. Looks like it's working. Okay, so the roadmap is a longer document, 29 pages. There's a lot of text, so I just wanted to sort of orient you all to it, I think, since we just have about 8 minutes here. So I just want to maybe, go over just some of the basics and maybe look at a few of the recommendations in this draft that are directed specifically at building codes and code officials. So we're developing the code, like 3 items, right? The code, the roadmap, and the living implementation guide. We wanted to sort of go through all these today with you since we are wrapping up budget period 1 at the end of this month. So these are all very much drafts, but we're trying to get them to a kind of a stopping point that we can hand them over to DOE and get some comments on. So kind of comment drafts, not an early draft. yeah, draft for comments. Okay, so the roadmap, we have some initial introductory material that I'm going to skip over, but it's essentially organized into focus areas and sub areas. So the goal of the roadmap is to try to capture what we're hearing from community outreach and stakeholders and beyond the community outreach efforts, I think, and as well as tag members, and trying to capture everything that doesn't fit in a building code or isn't really enforceable necessarily through a code or a building department. So this is really looking at policy. And I think another goal of the roadmap, I should say, is also to look forward to 2030, 2036, code cycles far out into the future and even out to 2050, where a lot of cities have set net zero goals. And decarbonization, of course, a different topic than resilience, but there is some overlap. And I think trying to develop a roadmap that outlines the goals of this collaborative focus on resilience and align it with some of the climate action plans that sustainability offices have and just some larger net zero goals. I think that's definitely something that would help keep the efforts of this collaborative that have been going on for about 2 years now, keep it going through the 2030s, which is crazy to think about, but that's the goal. Okay, so focus areas, as I said, focus areas and sub areas here. Are there 5 focus areas? There are 8 focus areas in this draft. We have the building sector, zoning, planning, and land use, transportation, water management, energy generation, city-owned properties, and a final focus area on aligned agencies and offices. So I think that final focus area is looking more like state agencies, especially for Arizona, since it's a home rule state. Think about how jurisdictions can maybe work with state agencies. So that's the structure. And you can see, as I said, we're going beyond building codes with this roadmap. So the first focus area is on building codes, but it kind of branches out beyond that. So I think the first section maybe has our strategy in it in general. So I just want to go over that, and then I can turn it over to Julia after I go over the focus area 1, the building sector here. So I'll just point out some of the recommendations. This is very much a draft. This was done in coordination with a few of us on the core team, the University of Arizona, Nature Conservancy, a few other staff members here at NBI helped me develop this, and we tried to shop it around as best we could, but it's definitely a draft, and it does have some recommendations for building officials and just trying to figure out how we can help support capacity, increased capacity, I think, basically for building officials. So definitely want to get some input on this. And as Leslie had said, if you have any feedback, you already got this attached in an email. I think that went out last week or the week before. If you can get us comments back by October 15th, that would be great.
And if you don't want to find the email, I added them to today's appointment. So if you want to just come back to the appointment for today, you can find the links to all 5 documents that are being shared.
Okay. Thanks, Leslie. So the first goal, I think this one makes a lot of sense to everyone on this call. We can probably go over this one very quickly. Advancing minimum codes and standards, right? We're trying to increase stringency to address resilience. That's what the project's been about. So I tried to break it down into several sub goals. Adopting this resilience code, I would say that's the first goal in the roadmap for a reason, right? That's the one that's most near and dear to my heart. I tried to also point out that there's, as I just said, there's net zero and decarbonization goals throughout the Southwest. Some points of alignment there that should be kept in mind. There are some stretch codes as well. Urban heat island mitigation is an issue. Native and natural building practices, something that's being addressed. Insurability is a major issue we keep hearing about nationwide. Embodied carbon issues are starting to become incorporated into model energy codes, and that's something we want to keep in mind. passive design credits and trade-offs. The 2024 ICC has somewhat complicated credit systems, but they serve a function. This is something we're developing with Shay at Quadro, who's helping with the rural and residential tag, focusing on rural and residential properties. So thinking about how to develop trade-offs that allow for more affordable options in cases where maybe some of the increased, or maybe the most obvious code measures to propose to address some hazards are maybe more costly or not applicable to single family homes, thinking through that. And then code harmonization is the last issue here. Just making sure that building codes and planning and zoning codes are all lined up, right? I think we heard from Anthony and Matt kind of actually on that point. Two of the other sub goals under this roadmap, focusing on building codes, streamlining permitting, and supporting building officials. Like I said, these are kind of focused on capacity building. And we have learned over the past few years in a few states, including Arizona, that there's increased pressure on building departments as the codes are getting more complex for building officials to speed up the permitting and inspection and plan review processes. So we thought it was important to include some of these ideas in the roadmap where we can maybe try to offer some recommendations for how to address this. And I think it would increase public support for a resilience code if we can say, hey, it increases energy savings, increases energy efficiency, and addresses resilience. And it's also going to help streamline the permitting system for city staff and reduce delays for builders. So maybe think through some recommendations there. And then supporting the building officials is another goal that we would like to see happen, of course. And if you have any input into this, that would be appreciated. Code trainings is really the main idea that we had here. And I know there are a lot of efforts to provide trainings to building officials on resilience. So those are kind of the 2 points that we have here. So I think that pretty much summarizes things. I see that I'm at time. So I'll just go back up to the cover page here, and Leslie, I'll let you moderate, but if we have time for any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Is anything real quick? If not, again, through the 15th, I think having this one's a little more drafty in the sense, or a little more conceptual in the sense that there may be a lot of text here, but there's a lot of room for this to shift over the next year or so. So I would say, if you have to focus your effort, the code is really the important piece in terms of input from everyone right now. But yeah, feel free to look through this, and if you have any thoughts. But this will be something I think we'll probably regularly come back to as we really firm up the full direction it's going. But really nice start in terms of structure. Appreciate that, Kevin.
Yeah, and I think that's right. It's more drafty, and this is really something that's going to become, I think, more important as we reach the end of the project, which is scheduled for 2028, where we're really trying to think about how to keep these efforts alive and continue momentum, continue increasing resilience. So we've got some time with this one.
That, Julia, you're up.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you will let that happen. Once it loads. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to dive right in because it looks like we only have about 12 minutes or 13 minutes. So for the Living Implementation Guide, basically, there were 2 key questions that we wanted to ask. What form was the guide itself going to take? And then what was going to sort of be the constituent parts of the guide? So the first slide just shows an example. I guess I could put it in slideshow if you want, but can you guys, I think you could see it. I have a big screen. In order to come up with the form that we thought the living implementation guide should take, we looked at a bunch of different existing examples, and they range from sort of on the low end of cost and resource intensity, just like a one-off kind of PDF. There are a lot of implementation types of resources and how-to guides that are just a single document. Some of those are regularly updated, but nevertheless, it's a PDF document. To the sort of much higher resource and time and cost intensity type of guide, which would fall on an example of which would be like the LA house, which any kind of demonstration house, which are basically like actual buildings that showcase best practices and technologies as illustrations of the types of policies and technologies that they're advocating for. We ultimately decided to be somewhere in the middle, a little bit towards the higher resource intensity, because we do have resources to develop new resources and not just sort of compile all of existing resources. So I basically put us somewhere in the middle on this spectrum, but ultimately it's going to be a compilation of resources that's going to end up on the website. I put the link to the website on the bottom. I think most of you already have this, and hopefully you've already visited it at some point. To be clear, there's no resources there now, but ultimately that's where the Living Implementation Guide resources will ultimately end up. And then the second question is, what should be in that? What are those resources? What should they look like? So I think most of you heard from me a couple of months ago. We basically decided on a logic model framework, which is essentially a way to sort of map out so the pathways that you would take from baseline conditions and existing inputs towards the outcomes that you're trying to accomplish. And that's what you're seeing on this screen. I know there's a lot of arrows. I'm sort of in the final stages of whether or not maybe we need to simplify these arrows, but focus on the boxes for now. Basically what you see is on the left, you start with the inputs, which is you can think of as sort of what are the conditions today, and then what kinds of barriers you anticipate facing in order to try to accomplish some of those long-term goals that are on the far right of the model. And then the core of the model, which is in the middle, that's what's going to be the components of the Living Implementation Guide. That's the activities and outputs that are going to be needed in order to address the barriers that we've identified so that we can accomplish the short, mid, and long-term goals that we're hoping to accomplish. So basically all of this in this model is coming from the great work that's been done throughout the past year and a half, almost 2 years now, by other groups. So for example, the barriers came largely from the Illume survey and interviews, many of which you guys participated in, so thank you for that. And then the activities and outputs were also based on the kinds of suggestions that people said that they thought that they would need in order to actually adopt and then implement successfully the resilience codes themselves. So I think because we have about 10 minutes, what I want to focus on is the barriers and the outputs to make sure that we have a comprehensive list here and that you guys are not seeing any potential gaps. So for example, the key barriers that were identified were resistance from stakeholders, lack of political will, competing policy priorities, complexity of building codes, lack of municipal resources, code awareness or limited staff expertise, competing code priorities, and compliance challenges. So just think about that list. Think if there's anything that you can think of that you would foresee as being a primary barrier to either the adoption and or implementation part of this process. And if so, please make sure that you let us know that. So then after sort of thinking about those barriers and reflecting on those, and also looking over the types of resources that people were suggesting would be useful, we essentially sort of organized those different resources into 3 buckets. The first is marketing and community engagement types of materials. The target audience for that would be the general public, elected officials, but also building officials like yourselves and industry stakeholders. So that's sort of an everybody bucket, if you will. The second bucket is education and training related resources. The target audience here would be industry stakeholders and building officials and building departments. And then the third bucket would be technical support and compliance resources. And the target audience there would be building officials and to some extent industry. Obviously, there's some overlap between these two. That's why you see the arrows that are sort of connecting them. And the idea there is not necessarily that they would be the same resources, but that some of the information could potentially inform different types of resources. For example, some of the research reports and best practices that we find in case study research could be put out there as case studies for industry people, but also sort of rewritten in a way that members of the general public would also be able to access that information and consume that information in a way that would be helpful for them. So again, there's three sort of buckets of the types of resources that we're envisioning right now. Within that marketing community engagement, some examples would be a sort of plain language summary of the regional resilience codes themselves, public information and marketing campaign types of materials, letters of support, and a frequently asked questions page that people could sort of visit for frequently asked questions about the regional building codes themselves. The second bucket would be the education and training materials. Examples of those types of resources could include anything like general research reports, and this could be primarily we're thinking third-party existing research that's out there, and that the website and the Living Implementation Guide would be a sort of warehouse for some of that research that we already know is out there, but people don't necessarily know where to find it. Similarly, we're going to be doing some case study research to try to identify best practices, ideally with the focus on regional best practices, because we haven't really found a singular source that people can go to for that. But we know that in the conversations, for example, with the TAG meeting and also with the AP, that there are a lot of people who say, oh, well, we have this, or I've heard of this, I've heard of something like that in New Mexico, or I've heard of something like that in Vegas. And maybe we could use that as inspiration for what we're doing here. So those types of resources would fall in that bucket. Energy modeling, cost assessments, again, try to distinguish between first costs versus life cycle costs, and other types of training materials and potential certification guidelines or programs. Again, the target audience for that bucket of materials is industry stakeholders and building officials. And then the third bucket is the technical support and compliance types of resources. And here there would be things like sample job descriptions, adoption-ready checklists, sample incentive programs that local municipalities could potentially adopt in order to try to incentivize incentivize participation in the program, depending on the extent or the way in which the final building code is written. I know to some extent we've talked about this in other meetings, but the idea being that there would be a sort of a menu of different options that people could choose from, and that there would be, as opposed to being single requirements. And so you could potentially envision different types of incentive programs to try to say, okay, well, we know that only one of these 5 under heat mitigation, for example, is required. But if you do 2 of these 5, or if you do 4 of these 5, then we would potentially be able to give you X, Y, or Z. So that's the idea behind that. Inspection guides, a list of third-party certified contractors. That's something that seems to have come up quite a bit in Loom's work. And an RFP RFPs for third-party reviewer services. And then under each of these buckets, we sort of are envisioning some kind of frequently asked questions page for that particular type of target audience. And so that sort of summarizes, again, the general vision for the types of resources that are going to be part of the Living Implementation Guide. You'll also see then the different short, mid, and long-term outcomes that were identified, again, through a review of the previous meetings that have been going on for the better part of 2 years, and the other, like the scoping reports and the baseline assessment report that MBI did, and other work that's been done to try to identify the different outcomes. I want to leave a couple of minutes for time. I know there's only 4 minutes left for comments or feedback. If anybody in particular is thinking there's something that's obviously missing or a gap in that particular, in the barriers and activities and output section, I would love that feedback.
We've got one hand up.
Yeah, this is Matthew again, and I'll keep it very brief, but the resistance from stakeholder is pretty general. I don't know if you want to expand because what I am certain of is cost is going to be one of the biggest resistances. But
Right.
stakeholders in general is pretty broad because the industry isn't the only stakeholder when it comes to this kind of stuff. So maybe cost would be a separate barrier.
Cost as a separate barrier.
Yeah, just because I know that like green infrastructure, that's been one of the barriers that hasn't been overcome.
Right, right.
and
Okay,
adopted.
okay. Yeah, thank you for that. I think I was thinking, well, I guess you're right that it's definitely broad. We were thinking of putting those kind of, that's why, and I know it's impossible to see some of these arrows, but resistance from stakeholders, one stakeholder group that you might think of might be, would be sort of elected officials who are maybe like, I don't want to do this, versus resistance from other stakeholders like industry specific people. So you have some of an arrow down to the education and training bucket of resources, if you will, that has some of those cost assessment types of resources in it, as well as an arrow over to the marketing and community engagement materials, which might be more like targeted towards, again, the general public or elected officials to try to create buy-in for supporting adoption more broadly. That was the thought behind it, at least. Hopefully that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I did see that. I just the first cost is the only cost that developers look at, and whenever code adoption comes through, there's typically stakeholder groups that will come out against code adoptions because of that reason.
Do you
So
ever have, does the general public, are there any groups within the general public that sort of could counter some of that resistance that comes from developers, for example, or no?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So I think that's part of the larger idea, hopefully too, is like that there could be, if we can create enough larger, more widespread community buy-in, that could help potentially mitigate some of the, especially if some of the community buy-in is, well, hey, the life cycle costs are actually, or the life cycle benefits are actually good for us. We realize that the upfront costs are maybe higher for the developers, but for the community and the homeowners, or it might be better.
Thanks, everyone. And again, are you okay with the October 15th deadline, Julia, for comments from folks?
Yes, and this is slightly different from the version that was sent out before. So I'm going to send this to you. It's very minor changes, but it has all the arrows. So we'll send that.
Yeah, we're right at time, but just real quick on next steps. So these will get submitted to Department of Energy next month. We'll provide you the final copies. Keep in mind, this is just setting the framework or the scope for what is going to be developed in phase 2. And there'll be lots of opportunities to provide input and help with those resources as they're developed. And I think the plan at this point is our next meeting will delve a little bit more into what is going to happen in budget period 2, but just kind of high level. The plan is to have the final resilience code drafted by the end of next year, have a suite of implementations drafted by the end of next year, and then the net zero roadmap not until spring of 2027. So, but we'll get into that in a little more detail in the next meeting. That's it, and thank you, everyone.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Leslie.
Leslie.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks, Leslie.